Hi everybody, welcome to Stamping with Melva. Today I'm here to show you how I made the card that I shared on my blog today that was part of the demonstrator training blog hop. And the theme, of course, always is thank you. And so these are the thank you cards that I will be sending to anybody who places an order with me this month. But I want to show you how I used the embossing folder to actually, I inked up the embossing folder and then created the image on some basic white cardstock. So let me just show you how easy this technique actually is. Switch over to my desktop and we'll get started. Okay, so this is the card that I shared. I'll just get that up a little bit so you can see. Oops, there we go. So this is using the Seashells embossing folder that coordinates with the Sand and Sea collection that is in the January to June mini catalog. And this just is such a great technique. So let me bring in the embossing folder. So great embossing folder, so detailed. And the really cool thing about this is that you can stamp, because there's a stamp that coordinates with this. And then you emboss it, and then you can cut this out, a very detailed image to cut out that can go on your cards. Or you can then take your paper snips and actually just cut all of these seashells out individually. It's really a great collection. But you can use the embossing folder to ink up. So there's two sides to embossing folder. There is this side with the indented images. So these are all indents. And then these are all the raised images on the other side. So on this card, I stamped up the raised images. So most of the ink, although I did get some on the outside, most of the ink is on the inside of the images. I bring in this card, which is what inspired me to make the card. I actually inked up the other side. So I inked up the indented images on this, and you can see that most of the ink went around, and my seashells are actually more white than they are colored. But I thought I'd switch it up on this card. So let me show you. I've got a piece of Seaside Spray. I love this blue, and I'm very sad that it's retiring. So this is one of the in colors that I'm Stampin' Up that came out a couple of years ago, and every 2 years Stampin' Up does a color refresh. It's actually, sorry, every year, and they retire 5 in colors that they brought out 2 years ago. So this is one of the ones that will retire this year. So if you have an ink pad, don't have the re-inker, now's the time to get that re-inker so that you can continue using your ink pad. So this is a piece of cardstock cut 5.5 by 8.5. All of the written instructions, as well as the measurements and the supply list, will be on my blog. So you don't have to panic and write this down. The link to my blog will be underneath the video. So 5.5 by 8.5, folded in half to make my card base. And I've got a piece of the champagne foil, which is cut 4 inches by 5 1/4. And I got a piece of basic white cardstock. Now this is cut bigger than it needs to be. This is actually cut 5 3/4. It was just a scrap that I have by 4 1/4. And the reason I cut it bigger is so that I can trim it down to the size I want. And I'll show you what happens sometimes depending on how you ink this up. And it's just nice to have some extra paper to trim off. Okay. So I'm going to take and I'm going to ink up the raised images. I'm just patting my ink pad down on this side. And I'm going to try to go to the edge, but it doesn't always work, which is why I have some extra size to this. Okay, so I'm going to take my piece of cardstock, or basic white cardstock, put on the other side, and then just gently fold this in place. And bring in my Stampin' Cut and Emboss machine. So I've got my platform and then my layer 4. I'm going to run the embossing folder through. You only have to run this through once. And you'll get lots of ink on it. Put this down. Okay, and now the magic. So you can see that I did get some ink around the side. But that's okay. Got some ink on the seashells as well. And this is why I cut my my cardstock, my basic white cardstock, bigger because I've got a bit of a line here that didn't get any ink. And so now I can trim this down to the size I want. So this piece will be trimmed down to 3 3/3 by 5. So I'm just going to, actually I like the bottom on this, so I'm going to just trim off that top piece. Now, I like this side. This side's a little not quite, didn't get much ink on it, so I'm actually just going to trim off to 3 3/4. So, as I said, my final piece is 3 3/4 by 5. Okay, so now I can start and just adhere this down. Actually, I've got my ink pad out. I'm going to just close that before I get my finger in it. Okay, so you can use adhesive of your choice on here. I tend to be a stamp and seal person, but I know lots of people prefer the multi-purpose adhesive glue. Whatever works, that's what you can use. Turn that down. Oops, and I run out. Okay, well, we're going to switch to the multi-purpose adhesive glue. I ran out of Stampin' Seal here. I'll have to fill up my folder. Now, one of the advantages of the multi-purpose adhesive glue is it gives you a little bit of time to maneuver your cardstock around. Okay, now I've got a piece of Seaside Spray that is cut. I'm going to have to trim this because I think it's too wide, but it's cut 1/2 inch and you want it to be 3 3/4. So I will just stamp this in the middle. And then I'm going to trim it because I'm pretty sure it's too long. So, yeah. Okay, so I need to trim this. Try to keep my sentiment in the middle. Okay, there we go. Straight piece. Okay, so I'm going to use dimensionals to pop up my sentiment. I always like one in the middle as well. You could use one on each end, but one in the middle kind of stops the middle from kind of collapsing. So I'm just going to put this in the center like that. Now, I've got some of these Opal Rounds. I don't know that you can see how opalescent they are. They're really pretty. This is part of the Sand and Sea collection. So I'm just going to take one of these, the large size of the Opal Rounds, and put on either side of my thank you, just to kind of add some bling to my card. There. So see how pretty that is. And if I bring in my other card where so remember this was the one where I inked up the raised pieces, so my seashells got more of the ink on it, whereas this one I inked up the indented pieces, and so my seashells were white. So whichever you prefer, either way works, and produces very pretty card. Let me just switch over. There we go. So I hope you enjoyed that. As I said, if you have any questions, I will put the link to my blog underneath the video so that you can get all the measurements and written instructions for this, as well as the link to the supply list. If you have questions or comments, I'd love for you to post either on my blog or here on my YouTube video. And while you're here, please subscribe to my YouTube channel. I do post videos on a regular basis, and I'd love for you to please subscribe and get notified. So thanks everybody for joining. Bye.